Welcome to Renegade Thinkers Unite, featuring the sharpest minds in marketing, inspirational case histories, and weekly insights you can apply to your business. Find out why top CMOs rank this podcast among their favorites. Now, here's your host, Chief Marketing Renegade, Drew Nizer.
Before we get into this episode, I just wanted to thank you for listening, to applaud your curiosity, and suggest to you that curiosity may be one of the keys to your longevity, if not just a more gratifying career. And I was reminded of this last week when my 92-year-old father joined my wife and I in Florida. He was with us for about 4 days. Now, regular listeners of the show will remember him as the guest in episode 100. Very self-indulgent, but it was a wonderful show. Anyway, last week my dad was peppering me with questions about AI, artificial intelligence. Now, amazingly, he was reading AI Superpowers, China, Silicon Valley, and the New World Order by this guy, Kai-Fu Lee. And he was doing it for his book club, and he was intrigued by both the author's personal story and the big picture implications. Now, I haven't read the book yet, but I will link to it in the show notes, and perhaps we'll cover AI or the book in future episodes, especially if you all think that's a topic of interest. So speaking of that, if you do have a topic you'd like me to cover, and this has been happening a fair amount lately, feel free to text me questions, 917-679-8852, and what I meant, text me suggestions. Okay, now speaking of curiosity, it's time for me to introduce you to today's guest, Sean Regan, who's the head of marketing, he's the head of product marketing at Atlassian, a Australia-based company that is taking the software development world by storm, growing to 138,000 customers and over $1 billion in annual sales, despite rejecting VC money and using the words like ripper in earnings calls with analysts. So Sean, welcome to the show.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me, Drew.
So by the way, what does ripper mean?
Ripper means great. So okay. A great party might be a ripper party, or a great quarter could be called a ripper party in Australian.
I see. And during the analyst call, did they actually explain that, or they just keep going?
No, it actually had to be explained. But that's not the first time we've thrown Australian lingo or different lingo into things maybe where it wouldn't have existed. So it's maybe expected from us at this point.
I got it. So the analysts who follow you carefully already have sort of built their little Aussie lexicon, and I imagine you've had to too during your 3+ years there. How long have you been there, by the way? Yeah,
we're probably sitting around 3.5 years.
3.5 years. Okay. So I did notice that snow seems to come up a lot in your bio. What's the story there?
I think the story is there's sort of two things I really like doing, outside of my family, my son and my wife, is snow and marketing. Those are the two things that are really, really interesting and exciting to me. So I grew up in the Northeast, spent lots of time on snow, and even got to work in the industry for a little while. It was an amazing job where I worked for Aspen Skiing Company. And the task of the marketing team when I was on that team was Aspen is known for private jets and fur coats. And those people tend to be aging out of adventure sports. How do we get the youth to love Aspen Snowmass? And had just an amazing opportunity to work with a great team there. As the young person out of college, but we landed the X Games and we brought ESPN in. And for 15, 17 years now, ESPN has called Aspen home for the X Games, and that has had an amazing effect on their brand and their company. And it was really a bold move by them. So really enjoyed my chance to combine marketing and my passion then. But ultimately, I love working in tech. And so I've just chosen to work in tech in cities that are close to mountains.
There you go. All right. And are you a boarder or a skier or both? Or?
Oh, I'm both. And the reason I'm both is my wife for a long time worked for Burton Snowboards.
Oh.
And so the only way you deal with the ski or snowboard conflict is to be able to do the alternative sport just as well.
There you go.
So I learned a little bit there.
All right. Well, I always wanted to learn boarding, but it just was too hard. So I just let it go. I'm on skis, and that's it. That's the end of it. Okay. So, in thinking about your experience so far, do you think you have a marketing superpower?
I think it's both a superpower and it's a weakness, and you have to manage it. But I feel like I and a lot of great marketers see patterns in the world. It's a very associative brain, right? You see something that works over here with something someone said over there, and you can start to bring these different ideas together really, really quickly. And I feel like that's where you move from sales to marketing, where instead of one-to-one selling, you have this ability to associate something that creates a one-to-many. And I think that's a superpower in marketing. It's also something you have to watch for as well, because other people may not have that same level of association and speed, and they don't know what you're talking about. And so you have to kind of check in and make sure that this wild idea that you have is actually bringing people along with you. And that's how you see it come to fruition.
Yeah, that's so funny you say it exactly that way. So it's funny, and I think I'm writing about this in the book. I was working on that area, is that there are many times in my career where I have seen the answer in the first meeting, literally written down the language that would become the campaign, and I had to just put it away. And I had to put it away because you got to bring people along, as you said, and you sort of have to prove it. You have to make a case like a lawyer. You can't just say, he's innocent, trust me. It just won't work. So yeah, that's interesting. And the interesting part of pattern discovery is that is something that is unique to humans. I mean, when we talk about AI, we're going to be talking about, yes, they can match 1 million pieces of data and find, the cancer cell that matches. But that's a different kind of pattern observation that we're talking about, because we're really talking about seeing patterns from completely different fields and then bringing some kind of interesting association, which is uniquely human. And that keeps people employed. If you have a uniquely human characteristic. Okay, so very cool. Since I have already brought up my dad and he's a regular listener to the show, could you explain what you all do to someone who knows nothing about software development and thinks the word agile is a physiological characteristic?
Yeah, so I'll assume your dad is, maybe somewhere in his 70s or 80s, so he's
90.
probably around
92.
92. So, I mean, surely he had a Windows 3.1 computer, maybe. If you remember that whole system of working was based around personal productivity. You had a mailbox, right, that had an envelope that you put your information in, figuratively. You had a trash bin where you threw away the files and it made the paper noise. And you had file folders where you hid your files away in sort of this secret foldering mechanism. Your dad lived through that amazing era of what was personal productivity. And what the generation of workers that are coming into the workforce today are coming into is a completely different era. We've gone from the era of personal productivity as the model for computing to an era of team productivity and team effectiveness as the model for how great software companies are designing their products. So simply put, Atlassian exists to unleash the potential of every team, and we're going to do for team productivity what Microsoft really did for personal productivity in the 80s and 90s when your dad was probably using computers.
Okay, so making teams function, and a lot of this is around software development, right? This is around making it, and this is what it's built on, is getting these teams that have to work together to write the code, to build the specs, to do all this stuff, to work together to constantly iterate to make something happen very quickly.
Yeah, it's a little bit like the dark arts of Silicon Valley developers are going mainstream at this point in history. And I think the reason that's possible is if you think about products from your dad's era, they were physical objects made of atoms stored in warehouses with supply chains, right? So your ability to change and completely reinvent that product had what I'll call earthly constraints. There were atoms that you had to move around. And the software developers of today work almost entirely in bits. And so they can be as fast and as agile as their imaginations often. And what's interesting is the whole rest of the company isn't that way. And so as your product can change instantly now because it's software, the whole rest of the company is actually starting to adopt this more agile, this more flexible way of thinking and operating. And so we're seeing the patterns of software developers become adopted by whole companies.
And that's an interesting thing. I want to, before we get into that a little bit, I just want to sort of step back and talk about, in our pre-show correspondence, you mentioned that Atlassian no longer gives coffee to employees. And I just thought that was a funny thing. What's the story behind that?
Yeah, so I think there's a pretty simple thing. Sometimes our founders and our company culture just do very intentional things. And if you have ever visited Sydney, coffee is a huge part of the culture there. There's a shop on every block. But one of the hard things I think about working on software is you need focus. You need time to really get deep into work and solve complex problems. And that can come at the expense of collaboration. And so the coffee removal was an attempt to get people out of their desks and to have them have conversations. And there's a deeper reason beyond this than just having conversations. The way modern software is built is actually sort of an internet of teams, right? You don't have one giant team. You actually have several small teams. And so making sure that those teams are communicating and collaborating at a technical level is important, but also at a social level. They need to understand how each other works, what they're doing, and that makes for better products.
Very cool. All right. So while speaking of breaks, we're going to take a break. No coffee for me. Cut off already because it's the afternoon. And when we come back, we're going to talk about what you've done that helped this company grow so quickly. So stay with us.
You've been listening to another great interview on Renegade Thinkers Unite with Drew Neiser. But the value doesn't end there. As a listener, you can download a free ebook from Drew, Renegade Thinkers, interviews with 11 trailblazing CMOs any business can learn from. Top marketing thought leaders and proven executives from Time Warner, American Express, and Chico's, and others. Get your free copy at renegadethinkersunite.com/ebook. For listeners only, at renegadethinkersunite.com/ebook.
Okay, we're back, and my guest is Sean Regan, and it is Regan, isn't it?
Yeah. Well,
good.
Actually, technically, it's Sean Regan.
Uh-huh.
So I will make that correction. My wife is actually a great stickler for getting that right. So it is Regan, but we do know the Regans as well back in history.
Well, and I should have fixed it at the beginning, but we're fixing it now. Okay, so Regan it is, and he is the head of product marketing at Atlassian. And as we were talking about, this is all about software development teams working together. One of the things I read was that your largest product, your biggest product is JIRA, and it's, I think, got 65,000 users. And you guys made the decision to completely rewrite that from the ground up. That's a big deal and took some courage. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, and I want to play the name game a little bit more with you because it's fun. So
Yes.
You nailed it with Atlassian. You said it right. That's terrific. JIRA is the one that a lot of your listeners may know.
Okay, JIRA.
We're not done there.
Okay, wait.
If you think about Atlassian, we're thinking about so much more than software development. So we also have products like Confluence and Trello that reach millions of users. Basically, any knowledge worker who needs to collaborate might be using a tool like Trello or Confluence. And we play in the IT space as well with tools like JIRA Service Desk. So you raised an interesting thing about numbers of customers. Atlassian, our big hairy goal is 100 million monthly active users, and that's what we're pacing to. So we're aiming pretty big because collaboration is pretty big.
Okay, so let's just go back to the rewrite, for JIRA. I mean, it was just ground up. I mean, that's a big deal. It's like, you've got people who are used to using the product a certain way. They're used to the interface. And then suddenly it's like, nope, forget about that. You got to go with this.
Yeah, it was a big bet. And there's no joy in that bet when you're making it. And we actually made that bet just before our IPO, which is the boldest time to consider a rewrite as you're about to go tell the world that you can predictably deliver results. The reason we did that is that as every company in the world becomes a software company, and what I mean is, a Tesla is differentiated both by its physical form, but also by the software. Your iPhone is both software and hardware. Even your insurance is now online, right? As companies become more software driven, everyone else in the company needs to work with the software team more directly. It's not some department down the hall. And so the reason we completely reimagined JIRA is we had to evolve it to be something that the broader organization could work with. It couldn't be a super developer-focused only tool. It had to work with the whole organization. So let me give you, I think, a really fun example. Back in your dad's era, maybe, generally enterprise software was ugly. It was heinous, and it didn't matter because the boss told you had to use it.
Right.
And in today's era, you and I and any of our colleagues can actually go out and decide what product it is we want to use. We choose the best product for the job, and that means it has to be beautiful. And so that's why we've reimagined JIRA with an extension into design tools. Designers in Adobe or InVision or tools like that are designing the product and need to hand it off to engineers to build it. And so connecting those teams that aren't just coders is a big part of the strategy.
Right. So making it a lot more intuitive, sort of taking a page out of, it's sort of like the original, an Apple versus a DOS kind of a thing where, so that makes sense. Okay. So when you do this, I imagine a big part of this, the marketing that you had to deal with was just, hey, current customers, this is okay. This is really good. I mean, and was that a big part of your marketing in 2018, helping them sort of get over the hump? This is new, but it's does what it used to do, but it does it a lot better and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, exactly. You have to get it right by your current customers to live to launch another day, right? If you do that wrong, it's never going to happen for you. But at Atlassian, we raise the stakes, I guess, a little bit in that we don't have a traditional sales force out selling our product. Our product is sold and distributed by our customers through word of mouth and the actual adoption of using it. And so if we make a mistake on the product front, then we've made a huge mistake on the sales front. So if you think about Atlassian, and actually I think this is a pattern you'll see over the next decade of marketing and business, is product-led growth is what's brought Atlassian to this point, not marketing-led growth, not sales-led growth, but product. And so we have to get that right by our existing customers so that they have the interest and willingness to carry our brand forward. And it's a really interesting re-evolution of how you think about marketing and product.
So let's talk about product-led growth. So you make this good product, but how do you sort of bake in the sharing? I mean, is sort of the kind of thing where an end user, and I know you have a freemium product, but so that an end user adopts this and reads about it somewhere, hears about it adopts it, and then said, wow, this is really good. I'm going to get the rest of the organization to do it. I mean, what are we talking about with product-led growth?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very good high-level example, which is, I think a simple way to describe JIRA is it brings order to the chaos of project management and building things. And so when someone feels like there's chaos in their organization, they might go out and try JIRA and bring that in and then test it with their team. And the team will say, this is good, we want more, or this is bad, we want out. And so we have to make the product easy to adopt. We have to make it easy to afford. We have to make it easy to implement. So I think a great example would be, we actually don't have freemium for JIRA today. We have it for some of our other products, but it's $10 for 10 users a month. And so there's no PO or RFP or purchasing process or CIO approvals.
Right.
We've made the product incredibly consumable. And this originated from, I think, something in the developer space, which was developers don't love sales and marketing. And if there's any segment in the world that uses ad blockers the most, it's actually developers. And so you have to create a situation where they want to adopt the product and they find value in it very quickly and then bring their friends along.
So is a big part of what you do, I mean, do you have sort of user groups and things where they're sort of providing active feedback to the product, or these are the kind of people who would do it no matter what?
Yeah, there's sort of a few different ways that we think about that, and that I think your listeners, as they evolve their own products and companies, will experience. And I'll just maybe draw that distinction. When your product was built and deployed on a server, behind someone's firewall in their data center, you as the vendor had very little ability to understand what was going on and how it was being used. But in the modern cloud era, you actually have the ability to test and roll out and iterate and get feedback on everything you ship in real time. And so you can actually make these amazing changes to product to make them better based on real-time feedback. But there is a traditional element as well, which is we have about 400 user groups around the world that, generally meet once or twice a quarter, and they get together and they essentially help each other. It's absolutely amazing. It's the physical manifestation of an online forum, essentially. And that community is a huge part of growing a brand that self-distributes.
And what do you do on your end to contribute to this community, to get them to sort of get together? How do you facilitate that?
So it all started, if you go back to the original story with Mike and Scott in Australia, they didn't really have budgets. They didn't have sales teams. They were just two guys. But what they did have was a bunch of stickers and cases of beer. And so they just went out, put the stickers on the beer cans, and handed them out at these meetups among software developers, and they basically started conversations. And so we've provided the punch and pie, so to speak, and usually we help try to organize the venue, and then they self-organize. So there's a very basic role that we play, which is creating the conditions, and the community comes in and fills that space. So, as an example, I was in New York at our user group, and a customer's having a problem with some sort of internal process, and so another customer got up and gave a presentation about how they've solved it. And it doesn't actually require a lot from us, other than a key part of our brand, I think, is relevant to this, which is we really, really, really believe in openness. And it goes back a little bit to that, that example of sort of the personal productivity era.
Okay.
The openness of the modern era is share your ways of working, share your best practices, share the playbooks that you use to help run your company better. And so we've ourselves as a company have adopted that and sort of open sourced the ways that we run our business. And I think we're leading by example, and we see our customers following. And so I think that's probably the thing that does the most to grow it.
So, and that's really interesting, because it's just in a topic I'm about to dive into tomorrow. In fact, with that podcast I'm recording, when you talk about sharing your best practices and openness, I mean, how open are we talking about? I mean, can everybody sort of look under the hood and look at your code and say, "Oh, I could fix this or make it better"? I mean, are we talking about that, or are we just talking about here's how we do stuff for ourselves? Now,
so I think back in the day, it was that simple, right? Go open the code, because it was on-premise software, and you had direct control of those bits. So yes, in the cloud era, it's not exactly that way, but we, as an example, when I joined Atlassian, we were around 700, 800 people. We're at 3,200 now, and we'll probably be at 5,000 next year. And so we're scaling incredibly. And you can imagine that for a lot of companies, that would be mayhem. And we have to figure that out ourselves. So we've developed things like team health monitors. That's when you basically pull your team into a room and you go through this quick process of evaluating whether or not we have the right things to succeed on this project or this team. And we've made it a downloadable form on the internet. You can go and take this form, and it instructs you how to run a health monitor. And then based on what you learn in that health monitor, we provide a series of ways and best practices we call plays for how to rectify that. So, for example, if we didn't have aligned understanding or aligned metrics, we provide you a set of ways to go and get there. So it's essentially taking the things that help us scale, help us build, and help us function as a company, and then teaching everyone else how they could use those.
Very cool. All right, we're going to take a break. And when we come back, we're going to just keep talking about openness, product-led growth. Stay with us. Did you know that Renegade Thinkers Unite was ranked number 2 of the top 10 podcasts for CMOs by Crackerjack Marketing? Wow, we're really honored. Now, we couldn't do that without amazing guests, and we've had some amazing CMOs on this show, and also terrific listeners like you all. If you like what we do here, please subscribe on your favorite podcast player. That way, you'll never miss an episode. Also, as a special thanks, I'd like to send you a free ebook on Renegade Thinkers. Now, for that, just email drew@renegade.com. Now let's get back to the show. Okay, we're back, and my guest continues to be Sean Regan, whose name we have now properly pronounced, who works for Atlassian, which I've gotten correct, and their lead product is JIRA. So, boom, all three of them done, properly pronounced. Let's go back to product-led growth. It is, in many ways, as a marketer, It's one of those things that I hear and that I think all CEOs would love to be able to say, I don't need marketing. My product does all the selling. But it's rarely true that actually works out. At some point, you actually have to get more people into the pipeline to discover your product, and word of mouth can't get you there. Obviously, you guys haven't reached that point yet.
Yeah, I mean, there's an interesting financial shift that I think is also happening within companies if we zoom out. Atlassian spends less than 15% of revenue on sales and marketing. And we've even been close to that 10%. Now, if you look at modern software companies, it's not uncommon to hear of companies spending 50% or 80% of their revenue on sales and marketing. And so what gives? I think it's the question I'd ask if I were a CFO. What the hell are you doing if you're only spending that much? What it means is we actually can put a lot more money into product development. So our investment in product development is actually far greater. So we're shifting the economics of the way you build products. And that's a big part of it, right? If we can put more money into building the best product than the right product, we can put less money into marketing. And I know that sounds like pie in the sky, like, oh, it's not that easy. And it certainly isn't easy. But marketing and product really, really try to work closely together to make sure we're building the right thing for the right way. And I think in a way that customers will consume it. So, if I were you, I'd say, Sean, prove that to me. Like, show me how that works, right? Like,
yeah, that sounds like a good question. Yeah, show me how that works. And I have another question, but how does that work?
How can you do that? So if we go back to that playbook example, right, you have people on the internet searching. They're saying, how do I do this? How do I organize a team? How do I run a project, right? These are just keywords that relate to our business. If we can produce great content and great materials that answer those questions, then we'll rank for those words. But Sean, how does it get to product? Well, if you think about our Confluence product, it's a wiki, and you could put a team health monitor template into that wiki. So now customers have the choice of printing out a PDF or using a digital version of it. And when they use that digital version of it, they tag their colleagues and coworkers, and they start using it, and they start finding value, and the product starts to sell itself. And so this is a reimagining, I think, of how a company and how modern companies build and market products. It's not a assembly line where product hands something off to marketing, marketing hands off something to sales, and each one of them is supposed to do their own discrete job.
Okay, I get a lot of this, and I think that part of me thinks of the case, Zappos always used to say, well, we don't spend any money on marketing. And the truth is they spent all their money in free shipping. And so so the typical order was someone would buy 12 boxes of shoes and then they would ship back 10 of them, which is a terrible business model. But it left no money for marketing. I would argue part of the way you get the barrier to trial is very low, with such a low price. So that makes it very easy to try the product. I think a lot of companies, the software companies you were mentioning, their marketing automation companies, they want a higher price point. So they do invest more and spend more to acquire customers. So I'm sort of wondering if there's some, you're accepting less value per customer in order to lower the barrier to make it easier to get to customers. The more customers you have, the larger your sort of amplification possibilities are, which is just an interesting way of looking at your business, right? And thus, if you could get to the number you said of, 100 million customers?
Yep, 100 million.
That's a lot of amplification. So talk to me a little bit.
I think you're cracking into the most fascinating part of what's changing in business today, right? Maybe this is controversial for me to say, but we leave money on the table. We leave money on the table because we believe that our products could distribute to the whole world. And we believe that you earn a higher price point based on your value, right? So you can go and sell and get the highest price point out of the gate, or you could prove that this is a valuable product over time. The reason why we think this model is changing for every company is software has almost no marginal cost. And we have to remember that. The world is organized around this concept that you have raw materials and costs of goods sold that are variable based on the number of units you sell. Mm-hmm. But when you write software once, you can sell it one time or you can sell it 1 million times. And the cost of producing that is almost nil. And so it makes you rethink the long-term economics of an industry when that happens. And that's why we've really kept these price points low. Is it's good for us and it's good for our customers. And over time, if we deliver great value, they'll find great value, and we'll have the opportunity to bring them other products or sell them additional versions or packages that add value on both sides.
Right. So upsell, cross-sell, but you've established a good relationship because the value proposition is so strong. And particularly in this case where if you're helping other software companies get their products to market faster and be more effective, you really fundamentally affected the way that business operates, and you did it at a relatively low cost. A lot of what's happening in my understanding, in an article I read about, you all talked about automating sales, automating customer engagement, automating customer service. What role, if any, and first of all, is that all true? That's been a big part of your ability to scale?
Yeah, it's absolutely true, but I'll make a caveat on it. It's impossible to automate everything away, right? We're a human-driven business. But let me give you a really, I think, stark example. The end of a quarter at a typical company is where the hockey stick of revenue comes in, right? It just goes vertical the last 5 days. But that vertical chart is actually a graphical representation of human pain and suffering. And what I mean by that is you have a salesperson, you have a buyer, you have a procurement person, and you usually have a lawyer that are all grinding each other out at 7 p.m. on the last day of the quarter to try to get to this agreement. And it's a giant waste of everyone's energy. It's a giant waste of happiness. It's a giant waste of goodwill. And so we've been very transparent from the beginning. The price on the website is the price you will pay, whether you're Goldman Sachs, whether you're a small business on the corner. And so is that automation, you ask? Well, no, it's not really automation, but we've eliminated that friction point,
right, that
slows down deals and adds cost and pain.
Right. There's no negotiation here. This is what it is. This is not a car showroom. This is what it is. It's that's interesting. So
if you think about enterprise software too,
right?
Typically those products in enterprise software, right, that'll be your big name software companies selling, usually have somewhere between a 20 and 60% discount built into the pricing.
Mm-hmm.
So every customer feels like they have to protect themselves from being taken advantage of.
Right.
And I think that's something we just take out of the system, and I'd encourage a lot of other companies to think about it.
So that's a good place for us to sort of wrap up here, and because it feels like in many ways you're in a unique marketplace, and I want to see what we can do to expand, because you are selling software, and you're selling software to folks that, for the most part, are software or users and a lot of developers in the world out there. How does this? What are some of the lessons that you think you've learned that are applicable to other just B2B marketers in terms of how they need to sort of rethink their drink when it comes to their approach to marketing?
Yeah, I think one of the things you want to look at if you're building a software product is first of all, I think all marketers need to remember that distribution is king. I think it's true. If you build it, they won't come. Period. Right? That's our starting point as marketers. And so you have to think about immediately, what is the problem you're solving at volume, and how do you find those people? So I'd say that's a key thing to start with. Where are there pools of people suffering from the problem you solve, and how do you reach them? If you don't build something with that knowledge up front, it will not go anywhere.
Right.
I think the second one is, and this is a really, I think, a known thing throughout marketing, but as you get into a more consumer style go-to-market like ours, numbers rule, numbers rule, numbers rule. But it has to be a combination of the head guided by the heart, right? Make smart decisions, but bring emotion and creativity to it, because otherwise you just show up. And in all marketing, you need to show up and stand out. And so I think that's the part of it. Maybe this is general advice, I guess, or general thinking, but one that I also hold true, and I think it's relevant to the renegades that listen. If you're not nervous about it, even a little bit, there's a pretty good chance it doesn't matter. And so as you're rolling out a marketing campaign, messaging, PR, you need to have a little bit of angst about, is this going to land perfect? Is it going to create a controversy? Is it going to work? If I don't feel that, I think it's a gut check on me to say, have we done enough? Is this going to cut through the noise?
Love it. What a great. So do you have an example of that, of recently where you tried something where you go, oh, I don't know, maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. I sure hope it does.
Yeah, I mean, there's one that I just really love because it came out of a hackathon that we run internally, and it's called a hackathon, but you don't have to code to be a part of it. Obviously, from one of the core audiences of JIRA is developers. So how do we find those? Well, there's millions of them in coding schools, right? Things like Coursera out there learning. But developers hate advertising. So how do we do it? We called up Coursera on a Friday after this hackathon, and we said, hey, we'd love to run a program with you where after someone checks out for their class in computer science, we pop a message, a banner to them that says, the world needs more software developers. Congratulations on taking this class, and congratulations, half of your class has been paid for by Atlassian, the creators of JIRA. Good luck in your career, Mike and Scott, our founders. And there is no data, there is no metrics, right, that you can go to the market and bid on those people and say, this is a great investment. That was a bet that delightful surprise after you've run your credit card will influence you as a software developer. And it felt like a huge bet, but at the same time, the reaction from the community was so strong that it was really, I think, just a really rewarding experience that we bet on the right thing, and we saw a great reaction from the community.
Well, there's several things I want to sort of point out about that. One is that it's a great target. You got them young, right when they're going to be thinking about the tools that they're going to be using. Two, the course and the training was really important to those. They were that moment, that relevance of the message to it. Three, you were saying, by the way, we helped you get there. That's kind of cool, and did it in a way. It wasn't like saying, oh, by the way, buy a product. It was human, and it was so all sort of good things were happening there. But the hard part, so the nervous part for you was simply, I don't think we're going to be able to measure this directly.
Yeah, it's I think that's it's not a folly for modern marketers, but if you go to Google AdWords, right, you know exactly what you put in, and you can know exactly what you're going to get out. And in some ways, in my mind, it's almost a perfect market. It's sort of like what I would consider to be coal mining, right? If you go in and you do a bunch of work, you'll produce a certain amount of value. And I think marketers have to figure out how to do asteroid mining as well. Asteroid mining it may not work. It probably isn't going to work. No one's ever tried it. But damn, if it works, you're going to get incredible value. And so there's this race to the benchmark, I guess I'd call it, which is, hey, I'm going to go spend money and do things the exact same way everyone else does it and try to beat them with an incremental achievement. That's the core foundation of how you go to market, I think. But you have to have those asteroid mining bets where you say, no one's doing this. I'm going to find the advantage there first. And if you do that, you can exploit that advantage until the whole rest of the industry copies it.
Yep, it's so true. That's what Renegade Thinking is all about. Asteroid mining, folks. I love that expression. I think I want to in fact, we're going to have to spend a couple more minutes on that because the episode is going to be called Asteroid Mining. So you had that example. I love that one. Do you have another sort of asteroid mining example that you guys did where you took a shot where it wasn't as clear, like, as you say, Google AdWords?
Well, I'll give you pretty much my first career experience that drove me to that. I joined a startup in Boston after I had left the ski industry, and I said I wanted to do product management or product marketing, and they said, congratulations, you went to college and you know how to ski. Why don't you, this is paraphrasing, why don't you bang the phones for like a year in inside sales and we'll figure out if you have a brain on your shoulders. That is essentially what they said to me.
Right.
And so in that job, you basically make 100 phone calls a day attempting to connect to a customer. And it really frustrated me as like, this is the most inefficient use of my life right now that I could imagine, but I got to do the work. And what I realized in that job was we were selling instant messaging software at the time. And of course, our way to reach people were phone calls and emails.
Right.
So I started right-clicking on email addresses and adding them to my MSN Messenger and adding them to my AOL Messenger because you could do that back then. Right. And I got a connect rate that was like 9 out of 10.
Wow.
And so immediately I was able to get the customers on the line with me in instant messaging and communicate them through the actual tool we were trying to sell. And I basically was able to cut the line. And so I think it comes back to this idea that Atlassian holds very true, which is you need to leave 20% time on people's calendar, on their planning cycles, for them to think about what these new approaches are. And if you don't, then you get a bunch of people that just keep going into the coal mine, and they keep chipping away at the same thing until it's gone and there's no more value to be extracted.
I love it. What a great place to end. We are all going to go out and get our asteroid mining kits on together, give ourselves 20% of our time to think about doing things a little bit differently, because chances are if you're doing the same thing you did last year or 2 years ago, your competition is too. That's not going to cut through. All right. Well, Sean Regan, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you, Drew. Enjoyed it.
And to the listeners, as always, thank you for staying with us. And until next week, keep those Renegade thinking caps on and strong.
This has been Renegade Thinkers Unite, but it doesn't end there. Just go to renegadethinkersunite.com for more and subscribe to the show. That way, you'll never miss an episode. We'll talk with you next time on Renegade Thinkers Unite.